In 1916, the city of New York passed a resolution that changed what an American man was allowed to do on his own property. It wasn't called a ban, it was called zoning. And within a decade, the United States Supreme Court had upheld it, ruling that a local government could tell you what trades you were permitted to practice on land you owned and a structure you had built with your own hands. The forge went first, then the smithy, then the tannery and the charcoal pit and the casting shed that had stood on the working side of every American homestead for 250 years. What replaced them was a residential zone, a place where nothing was made, where no metal was shaped, no hide was cured, no axe head was drawn from iron, where the only legal use of the land was to live on it quietly and buy everything you needed from someone else. Your great-grandfather didn't lose those skills because he forgot them. He lost them because the law told him he no longer had the right to practice them where he lived. And his son grew up in a house where no one worked iron, and his grandson grew up not knowing that anyone ever had. There are 9 skills on this list. Every one of them was ordinary American competence for 2 centuries. Every one of them is now restricted, regulated, or flatly illegal to practice commercially on residential land in most of the United States. And the skill at number 1, present on every working American homestead from Maine to the Oregon Territory for 250 years, is now classified as industrial use and banned from residential property across most of the country. And we're putting it all back on the record. Before we get into the list, I want to be exact about something. When we say these skills are now illegal on your own land, we're not speaking loosely. We are describing the legal framework established by the Village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty decision of 1926. A Supreme Court ruling that gave every municipality in America the power to classify land use by category and prohibit certain trades from residential zones entirely. The homestead that existed before that framework was a different kind of place. A man smithed iron, cured leather, coopered barrels, and sharpened tools for his neighbors on the same land where he slept and raised his children, because that was what a working man did with his property. Later in this list, we'll cover the one skill that the International Harvester Company specifically lobbied to have removed from agricultural school curricula in the 1950s. Because a farmer who could do it himself was a farmer who didn't need to buy their equipment. Number 9. Forge welding. The oldest form of metal joining in human history. 2 pieces of iron heated to near melting temperature in a coal or charcoal forge. What smiths called a welding heat, identifiable by the white-orange glow and the slight sparking of the surface, then struck together on the anvil with precise, immediate hammer blows before the metal cooled. Without it, you could not make a hoe, an axe, a chain, or door hinge. It was the foundational skill of American settlement, the one technique that made every other iron tool possible. Today, operating a coal forge commercially on residential land is illegal in virtually every American municipality. The zoning classification is industrial, requiring a separate permit, a specialty zone property, and in most jurisdictions, an environmental review before the first fire is even lit. The skill used to shoe horses and repair plows on the same land where a family slept is now a regulated industrial activity requiring paperwork and fees, and a property classification most Americans will never own. Number 8. Brain tanning. Every frontier family that kept livestock processed their own hides. Moccasins, work gloves, knife sheaths, harness components, all required tanned leather. For 2 centuries, American homesteaders tanned the leather using the brain of the slaughtered animal itself, which contains a concentration of lecithin and fatty acids precisely sufficient to tan the hide of that same animal. 1 brain, 1 hide. The equation is exact enough that Native American tanners noted it as a rule and passed it to European settlers who used it without modification for generations. Brain tanned leather is subtler, quieter, and more moisture resistant than commercially chrome tanned leather. Operating a tannery today, even a small-scale one producing a handful of hides, requires an EPA facility permit in most states. The regulatory framework does not acknowledge the difference between a man with a bucket and a chrome tannery processing 10,000 hides a week. The homesteader tanner did not disappear because the method failed. He disappeared because the regulatory framework that replaced him had no category for what he was doing. Number 7. Making a bellows. A forge cannot run without one. The bellows, 2 boards faced with leather. hinged at one end with a valve that drew air on the open stroke and forced it through a nozzle into the fire on the close. Was built by the smith himself from materials on any working farm. Goat or cow leather for the faces, hardwood for the boards, a simple iron valve. A smith who could not make and repair his own bellows was dependent on a supply chain for the most basic component of his work. Every smith made his own, the knowledge of how to build one, the geometry of the boards, the stitching pattern that made the leather airtight under repeated compression, the valve construction that maintained consistent pressure, was as fundamental as knowing how to swing a hammer. Without it, the forge was a cold pile of brick. With it, a man could heat iron to any temperature the work required, using nothing but wood and the labor of his own hands. The bellows was not purchased and shipped to the farm. It was built from what was available, and when it wore out, it was repaired or rebuilt. The leather faces required periodic replacement as they cracked from the heat. The stitching had to be tight enough to prevent air loss, but flexible enough to withstand thousands of compression cycles. A smith who could not maintain his own bellows could not maintain his forge. The two skills were inseparable. Number 6. Scythe Peening. Not sharpening, peening. The distinction matters, and the confusion between the two is precisely why the knowledge was lost. A scythe blade is first peened using precise hammer strikes on a small anvil called a peening block. This thins and hardens the cutting edge before it ever touches a whetstone. The peening draws the metal out, creating a thinner, harder edge than grinding alone can produce. Done in the correct sequence, a scythe blade held its edge through hours of hard use. Done wrong or not done at all, a scythe dulled within an hour and turned hay cutting from skilled work into brutal labor. Every farmer who cut hay by hand knew this. The peening block was as standard a piece of farm equipment as the scythe itself. It's now a museum artifact. The knowledge of how to use it, the angle of the hammer, the spacing of the strikes, the feel of properly work-hardened metal, exists today in a small number of traditional farming communities in Europe, and in the practice of a handful of American enthusiasts who sought it out deliberately. Peening required an understanding of metal that only came from working with it regularly. A farmer had to know by feel and by eye whether the edge had actually been hardened, or whether it only looked that way. If this record is worth something to you, hit like and subscribe. It's the only way we know to keep making it. Number 5. Charcoal making. Frontier smiths did not use coal, they used charcoal, made on site in a slow burn of stacked hardwood covered with earth that smothered the fire to pyrolysis, driving off water and volatile compounds and leaving behind nearly pure carbon that burned hotter and cleaner than the wood it came from. The charcoal pit was a feature of every working farm that kept a smithy. The process took 2 to 3 days of careful tending and produced a fuel the smith controlled entirely from timber on his own land. Burning charcoal commercially today requires an air quality permit in most jurisdictions. The frontier self-sufficiency loop: grow wood, make charcoal, fire forge, make tools, maintain farm, is now interrupted at multiple points by a regulatory framework that did not exist when the loop was built. The man who could run that entire loop without purchasing a single input from outside his property was not wealthy. He was simply competent in the way that competence was defined before the industrial supply chain made self-sufficiency irrational. The skill also required reading the burn, knowing from the smoke whether the pile was progressing correctly, whether the earth covering had been breached, whether the wood was burning too fast or too slow. A pit managed correctly produced quality charcoal in consistent quantity. A pit managed carelessly produced ash. The knowledge lived in the reading, not in the recipe. Number 4. Tempering steel by color. The heat treatment of a steel tool, heating to critical temperature, quenching to harden, then tempering by reheating slowly and watching the oxide colors that form on the polished surface. Pale straw for chisels and plain irons, darker straw for knives, brown for axes, purple for cold chisels, blue for springs. Each color corresponds to a specific internal temperature reached without a thermometer. Read entirely by eye, learned entirely by practice. A smith who could read those colors produced tools that held an edge under hard use. A smith who could not read them produced tools that either shattered on impact or bent and stayed bent. This was not advanced knowledge, it was basic competence. The difference between a tool and a piece of shaped metal that looked like one. It is now known by a small number of bladesmiths who sought it out deliberately, at a time when the supply chain had already replaced it with machine-hardened tools that required no reading, no practice, and no understanding of the metal at all. The colors appeared in sequence as the temperatures rose, and the window for each was narrow. Miss the straw and you were into brown before the chisel finished tempering. Pull it too early and the tool would shatter. The smith had one chance per heat. No instrument to consult. The eye and the hand were the only instruments available, reliable only after years of practice made the colors automatic. Number 3. Casting lead shot. Every frontier homestead that depended on firearms for food and defense cast its own ammunition. Lead was melted in a ladle over an open fire and poured into a shot mold. A hinged iron tool that produced a precise ball on each pour, cooled in seconds and was ready for loading within a minute. A man who ran out of shot 50 miles from the nearest supply did not go hungry. He found lead and he made what he needed. The knowledge was universal among men who used firearms for subsistence. Federal regulation of lead casting for personal use remains limited. Cultural knowledge of how to cast has been so thoroughly displaced by commercial ammunition supply chains that it exists today primarily among competitive black powder shooters and historical reenactors. The frontier homesteader who cast his own shot was not a specialist. He was a man who understood that the supply chain ended at the edge of his property and prepared accordingly. Number 2. Running a forge as a neighborhood trade. This is the skill that International Harvester specifically lobbied against. In the 1940s and 50s, as the company expanded its market for agricultural machinery, its representatives worked with extension services and school boards to remove blacksmithing and forge repair from vocational agricultural curricula. The reasoning was documented. A farmer who could repair his own iron was a farmer who bought less. The knowledge wasn't made illegal, it was made unavailable, removed from the one institution channel through which it was still being transmitted. The result within 2 generations was a farm population entirely dependent on manufactured replacement parts. Zoning law prevented the commercial practice on residential land. Curriculum removal prevented the learning in schools. Between the 2 mechanisms, the forge was eliminated from American agricultural life, as effectively as if it had been outlawed outright, which on most American residential land it effectively was. Number 1. The smithy itself. Not any single technique, the physical fact of a forge, an anvil, a set of hammers, and a man who knew how to use them, present on every working American homestead for 250 years. Not because the homesteader was a professional smith, because a man who owned the land and worked it needed to be able to shape iron. He needed to repair what broke rather than replace it. He needed to make what was needed rather than travel 50 miles for it. That man, that specific competent, ungovernable American man is not gone because the skill stopped working. He's gone because the legal framework of modern American land use was restructured to make his way of life impossible. The zoning resolution of 1916, the Supreme Court ruling of 1926, the curriculum changes of the 1950s, the industrial supply chain that made it economically irrational to make what you could buy for less. He was not exceptional, he was normal. We are the exception, the generation that does not know what iron sounds like when it reaches welding heat, that cannot sharpen a tool to the edge it needs, that cannot repair what breaks rather than simply replace it. The forges are cold, the charcoal pits have grown over, the bellows have rotted in barns that no longer exist. The knowledge is still there, in old books, in the hands of a few hundred craftsmen who learned it deliberately against the current, in the memories of the oldest people in communities where it was practiced within living memory. We're writing it down while we still can. There was a time when this knowledge was so common it didn't need to be written down at all. That time is gone. Subscribe before you need it and can't find it.